The real sounds of Africa there to once again kick off the World Football Phone. This morning we're talking football in Africa and in South America and players from over there playing in our leagues. So join in the conversation. If you've got any questions or comments yourself, then feel free. Pick up the phone, give us a call and be part of the party, as it were, on 0808 5909 693. That's 0808 5909 693. So it's a hearty welcome to our Springbokker Junior, Mark Gleeson. Good morning.
Good morning, Jonathan.
Here to take care of any questions or comments you have on African football and players from over there playing in our leagues. And also a hearty welcome to the legendino Tim Vickery. Good morning.
Good morning. Morning, Mark. Morning, Dotton. Morning, everyone. Let's have a good time for a couple of hours.
Absolutely, yeah. Tim's here for your South American questions and comments, and of course on players from over there playing in our leagues as well. So the number once again, 08085 909 693. That's 08085
Flawless.
909
Flawless.
693.
It's almost like you do this every week, isn't it? Flawless.
Very good. I'll tell you who was flawless, the great and much missed Gordon Banks. You know, we'll start off the programme, if you don't mind, with you gentlemen, pay your tributes to him. There have been all sorts of tributes this week. I wonder, though, whether what Gordon Banks meant, certainly to my generation of young people growing up, so as going back into the dark ages, Mark, did it resonate with people in South Africa, how brilliant this man, and what gentleman he was as well?
Yeah, look, the mythology of English football certainly resonates loudly here in South Africa, and Gordon Banks played here. He played here. I watched him as a kid.
He played in South Africa.
Yeah. You must remember in the late '60s, early '70s, in the holidays during our mid-season, your summertime, English footballers came out here to make some money. Bobby Moore played for the Cape Town club Hellenic. Mick Shannon played here. George Best played. Gordon Banks played at Cape Town City. And they were amongst, I would say, 20, 30 leading English footballers who played here just for a couple of matches over the summertime. They were allowed to come and participate in the league. Obviously gave it great resonance. In those days, it was whites only in the apartheid days. And then there were a lot of English footballers who came here sort of at the end of their career to make a living. Johnny Haynes was a very famous name. Budgie Byrne, England internationals who, once their careers were done in their late 30s in England, came and sort of had a pension in the way players these days head to America or Qatar or some lucrative place. But in those days, of course, there wasn't that much money, and so in the summer you went and earned a few extra pounds moonlighting, as it.
And just to be clear, as you brought in the political dimension, was this before there was an official cultural boycott of South Africa?
Yes, the cultural boycott really came sort of towards the late 70s. I think although the apartheid system was in full place in those days, I think there was no cognizance really on the part of these incoming footballers from England, to what they were participating in until much later. And there wasn't really much of a campaign in those days. England manager, current Crystal Palace manager. Sorry, I'm having a complete block.
Roy Hodgson.
Roy Hodgson this hour in the morning. He basically played his football here. That was the only time he really played any decent senior football was in South Africa. It was a question that he had to answer for when he was appointed England manager. It was dealt with. I think it was dealt with when he was appointed, and he had to answer for it. But there was a complete level of ignorance in those days as to what was really going down in the country, particularly from those who came from elsewhere to play on a part-time or on a guest basis.
Yeah, well, phew, is all I can say, because you almost dashed my hero worship of Gordon Banks. But I think even though it may have been on a knife edge for a moment or two with your answer, he survived it. Phew. And what about in South America, Tim?
Well, and especially in Brazil, an absolute legend. And he's locked in a footballing embrace forever with Pelé because of that save in that game in the 1970 World Cup. And it's almost like I think Pelé's glad that he made the save, because it's more famous for the goal that didn't happen than it would have been had Banks been unable to stop it. And that game is so important. I honestly don't think people in England realise how important that game is. It was a group game between England and Brazil. It is one of the finest, if perhaps not the finest ever performance by an England side in fierce midday summer heat in Mexico. And England are pretty much as good as Brazil, and England had plenty of chances in that game, but they lost 1-0. Banks had a fantastic game. It's not just that save. He has to make a few saves. He's up against a magnificent side, and every decision that he takes is correct. When to, catching it when he can, but when he can't, he's pushing it round the posts or pushing it to safety. It's a fantastic performance from him. Fantastic performance by Bobby Moore. A lot of people talk about that. And a fantastic performance by Alan Mullery, who does a wonderful marking job on Pelé. The whole team play wonderfully, wonderfully well. And the expectation from the Brazil players at the end of the game, and I've spoken to many of the players from that side, is that they were going to meet England in the final. The fact that Brazil won that game, and these Brazil players, what they've told me is they won the World Cup when they beat England, because it meant that their route to the final was through Peru and Uruguay. England then went on to face the West Germans, and it's that unfortunate game for Peter Bonetti. When Banks goes down with Montezuma's revenge, stomach all over the place, and Bonetti comes in cold, and England let slip a 2-0 lead against the Germans with 20 minutes to go. I think that's just unthinkable for that England side, and it clearly has to do with the fact that Banks wasn't there in goal. But so that took the Germans into extra time and tired them out. And then in the semi-final, it's the West Germany against Italy, and Germany take the Italians to extra time before Italy win 4-3. And that means that Italy take the field against Brazil for the final, utterly unable to last 90 minutes. The first 45 was actually quite an even game. The second 45 is just an absolute procession. And I'm convinced that it would have been a much, much more even game had it been England against Brazil in the final. And I think it might well have been had Banks not gone down with Montezuma's revenge. I think Brazil would have won. And perhaps it would have been a more one-sided game than the 1-0 group game, which is a great game. I think you can see it on YouTube or something. It really is a magnificent game between two fantastic sides. But that game and the save that Banks made means that he's been all over the Brazilian media over the last few days.
Let's not forget that England were the team to beat in that 1970 World Cup because they were world champions. But also I've read that Pelé says that I've scored over 1,000 games in my career, but the one that everybody remembers is the one that I didn't score. Which I thought was a brilliant tribute.
There's 2 or 3 in that World Cup. There's one against Czechoslovakia in the first game when he nearly scores from his own half. Something which is not that uncommon these days. Or I saw it in a game, Oscar Cardozo of the Paraguayan international did it in the week. But then it was unthinkable that someone could kick the ball that far, and it very nearly happened. The goalkeeper scrambling back, and it just drops wide. And there's one when he does an unbelievable dribble on the Uruguayan goalkeeper and runs round the other side and then tries to turn it in, and that one just goes wide. And those 3 moments, the one from his own half, the dummy on the Uruguayan goalkeeper, and the save that Banks made, they're probably, I think they're more famous, the goals that he didn't score in that World Cup, than the goals that he did.
Brilliant tribute. Paul in Norfolk says, guys, I'm 63. Gordon Banks rarely dropped a ball, used his body to block the ball, or pushed a ball back into a danger zone. The Bank of England with a very accurate statement. Yeah, nice way of putting it, and thank you. 08085 909693. I know many of you would have had a few days to ponder on this since the news that Gordon Banks had died. It's quite a shock, actually. It was a weird one for me. It's quite a shock. It was kind of somebody that you hadn't heard of for ages, but clearly there was something deep connection with Gordon Banks.
For our generation, Don, this is part of our childhood, isn't it? This is Someone who was an icon in the game at around the time that we were getting into football. So it's someone who for us has always been there. And you get the feeling that all of the tributes that were paid to Gordon Banks, and sometimes the tributes that are paid to people when they die, they can be hypocritical. You know that the people who are making these tributes, they've got other things to say about those people, and in other circumstances they might say other things. But with Gordon Banks, you just get the impression that it's all totally sincere.
Mm. There's obviously not many of the 66 team left these days, so it's.
There's still quite a few actually. There's still quite a few. I think Gordon Banks makes 4 who have passed away, 4 out of the 11, or at least 4 out of the 11 that were on the pitch for the final. So there's still a few left, and long may they live as well. This question from, by the way, on another note, maybe we'll come on to it as well. It's the funeral of Emiliano Sala in Argentina later on today as well. Might want to mention that along the way if you've got any information about that, Tim. But this for you, what do you think of the Ecuadorian Football League? It's a caller, John near Osaka, who wants to ask you. Hello, John.
I want to ask Tim about the Ecuadorian League. I used to live in Ecuador, and I support Liga, and I noticed this year they've seem to have changed the format. It used to have like 12 teams in the top division, and suddenly now there's 16 teams, and it seems to have new management. And I was just wondering exactly what's going on. I assume it's to do with money. And the other point I wanted to quickly mention was also about Deportivo Quito. I noticed they've gone all the way down into like the 3rd category of Ecuadorian football, and I'm just wondering what happened to them. And I have one other comment with regard to Valentine's Day, which you might find interesting, Dalton, after your previous...
After the Kenyan experience, yeah.
Yes. Well, in Japan, Valentine's Day traditionally would be what you would like to see, where girls give boys chocolate. Traditionally,
that's more like.
But
it.
Japan invented, or the chocolate industry invented White Day, which is a month later on March the 14th, where men are supposed to give girls chocolate.
Of course, they get us one way or another. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Thank you for that anecdote. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's talk Ecuadorian football though, John, and stay with us. And you might want to comment on what Tim's got to say.
Yeah, it is sad. The decline of Deportivo Quito is sad. They're known there as a taxi drivers team, and a team with a glorious history, but it's financial problems, and a lot of these teams are kind of surviving on a financial knife edge. That's one of the reasons for the expansion of the First Division to 16 teams. More teams, more product, more money, TV deal behind it, more business-like approach. That's part of the thinking. On the field, I think it's a very interesting championship. I think Ecuadorian football has come on in leaps and bounds over the last 20 or 30 years. A lot of that, I think, has to do with the presence in football of more black players. And Ecuador's Afro descendants community is relatively small as a percentage of the population. And it's kind of limited to a couple of areas in the country, and you can wander around Quito, the capital, and you can hardly see an Afro-descendant. But these areas are now producing lots and lots of footballers. Clubs are really looking at these areas, which I think is probably a double-edged sword for youngsters from those areas. It's almost like they're being shoehorned into a football career, and you wonder if this will limit some of their options. But I think it has been terrific for Ecuadorian football. The Afro-descendant population is as a general rule, it's physically much more powerful than the Latino population, and it's given Ecuadorian football an extra athleticism. And Ecuador have and this is a fantastic achievement. The South American Under-20 Championships finished last Sunday in Chile, and Ecuador won. That's never happened before, and there's some really, really interesting players in that team, and players who have been developed and groomed through Ecuadorian football. And there's one club who you may not remember from your time in Ecuador, because they're a new club in their current form. It's a club called Independiente del Valle. It's from the outskirts of Quito. And they got taken over about 10 or 15 years ago with the model of developing players, selling them on. And they've got a tiny little stadium. It's like 8,000 capacity. But they do this. The youth development work that they do is so spectacular that they are producing reams and reams of players. I mean, most of the best players from this under-20 side that were South American champions have come through the ranks of Independiente del Valle. They've just sold the goalkeeper to Sociedad in Spain, and they've got some other real talents there. So I'm quite optimistic about Ecuadorian football. I think it's moving in the right direction, and I'm also you're a Liga fan, or LDU, or Liga of Quito. Now they're the only Ecuadorian club who've won the Copa Libertadores. They won it in 2008. I don't see them winning it this year. I mean, since the competition has been extended, it used to be squeezed into the first 6 months of the year. It now goes all the way to the end of November, and lengthening it has really benefited Argentina and Brazil, the richer clubs. And in the last 2 years, what we've had this format, of the 16 quarter-finalists, 13 have come from either Argentina or Brazil. But looking round the field and thinking, well, outside Argentina and Brazil, who is there to look at? I think look at Liga of Quito. For me, it's the best team that they've had since they won the Libertadores in 2008. The coach, Pablo Repeto, a Uruguayan, he was the coach of this little Independiente del Valle, and he took them to the final of the Libertadores in 2016. So with some more resources behind him at Liga, who are a big club, terrific stadium as well. They've got their own stadium, which is quite rare in that part of the world. I think they're a team to watch in this year's Libertadores. But in your absence, John, while you've been away, and I'm sure this is a coincidence, I think Ecuadorian football is developing very nicely, thank you.
What was it like to live there, John?
Oh, well, I lived in the Galapagos Islands, so it was very nice.
Of course. Osaka versus, Galapagos. I know which one wins out on that respect. But Osaka, is it a suitable alternative, second best to Galapagos?
I live in Wakayama, which is sometimes known as the Tibet of Japan, because it's so far. You have to go so far to get anywhere else. But no, it's quite pretty around here, and I think the thing with Japan is surprising for most people is once you get out of the big cities, the countryside, the areas are quite mixed, as in housing, fields, factory. It's all very mixed. They don't really separate so much between green belts or things like this. It's a very different, it's very different from what you imagine when you think of places like Tokyo and Osaka. But you can get most things. Very modern.
Don't forget to send us a postcard, mate, and call any time, by the way. Thanks a lot, John. Appreciate the call. Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you.
Johnson?
Yeah?
Johnson, could I ask Tim a Latin question, if possible?
Of course, as long as you speak Latin to him, because I did Latin at school. It would be great to hear it actually spoken rather than...
Did you really?
Well, when I say I did Latin, I did one word of Latin at school. Yeah, exactly. He got it in one. That's the one I did. Amo Morris Amat.
Yeah.
Which means to love you
means
or not
nothing
to
to
love
me,
you, or
mate.
something like that. I know.
Nothing to me.
Sanguis est omnia is what I say. Sanguis est omnia.
You must be older than me. I mean, this is...
I'm not,
this is
actually.
revelation Latin. What's your question, Mark?
Yeah.
The question is, and it's relevant because Paraguay played South Africa in the last match, but I see the Paraguay coach Osorio, who was a very articulate and eloquent man, quit after just one game, a friendly draw against South Africa in November. Why?
I honestly don't know. And ever since this is a mystery to me. Osorio, the Colombian who took Mexico to the last World Cup, as was on Manchester City's coaching staff for a while.
And beat the Germans
all over. Yeah, worked all over. That's right. Worked all over the world. When he was appointed Paraguay coach, towards the end of last year, there was a doubt there. Why not Colombia? Now, Colombia they didn't know what they were going to do with their coach. You know, it was Jose Pekerman, the Argentine, who'd taken them to the last 2 World Cups, and it was all in doubt about whether Pekerman would stay on with Colombia, and it was assumed that Osorio really wanted Colombia and not Paraguay, and he got fed up. It was rumoured with Colombia messing around and not taking a decision. And so he went for Paraguay, but what he wanted was Colombia. So if the Colombia job became open, it was said that there was a clause in his contract that he could jump ship and he could leave Paraguay and he could go to Colombia. The mystery here is the Colombia have finally sorted their situation out. They've named someone born not that far from you, Carlos Queiroz.
Ex-South Africa
the
coach.
African-born Portuguese, ex-South Africa coach, who is a strange choice. I mean, usually Colombia go with Argentines. If they don't go with Colombians, they go with Argentines. Quite what Queiroz is going to bring to the table, I don't know. And he's worked all over the place. He's Real Madrid coach. He was twice assistant coach at Man United and very highly thought of. He's worked in the States. He's worked extensively in Asia. Most recently with Iran, but quite why they wanted him, I don't really know. He never worked in South America before, so I don't quite understand what exactly that the Colombian plan is. But anyway, at the very moment that the Colombian option no longer exists because they now have appointed, Osorio resigns from Paraguay. It doesn't seem to make any sense. And I've heard about personal reasons and unpaid salaries or something, but I really can't make head or tail of it, because you would have thought that if he was holding on for Colombia, that the moment to stay with Paraguay is exactly that, when the Colombian door shuts. So I wish I could come up with a better answer for you, Mark, but I can't. It's a mystery.
Okay, there's a few mysteries left to be solved in the next hour and a half or so. A couple of questions for you, Mark. We'll take them one at a time. This is from Phil, is it? No, it's from Louis. The UEFA Nations League was pretty successful in reinvigorating intra-season international fixtures in Europe. Do you think the African League of Nations will have a similar effect in Africa?
Well, I don't think so, because that African League of Nations is really a little bit of fiction at the moment. The UEFA Nations League model has been copied already by CONCACAF, who launched something at the same time, and the presumption is that it will come to Africa too. But I think the scenario is completely different. I mean, in Europe, what they tried to do was make more competitive rather large swathes or blocks of matches between the qualifying campaigns, between the European Championship qualifying campaign and the World Cup qualifying campaign, just to, get away from a pile of meaningless friendlies which sort of dominated the landscape, particularly towards the end of last year. We don't really have that same problem in Africa. We don't have that scale of friendly. We don't have friendlies. We don't have that... We just don't have the economic resources really to host matches on that scale. And we've already got, in a sense, a secondary competition a little bit like the Nations League, in the sense that it does fill up a little bit of the calendar, and it's used in a little bit of a development way. And that's what's called the African Nations Championship. And that is a tournament which overlaps a little bit with the qualifiers, but it's for national teams, but made up of home-based players only. Incorrectly, in my opinion, it's given A status by FIFA. In other words, they're regarded as full international matches and contribute points towards the FIFA rankings. But they are games between quasi-national teams made up of home-based players only, and they give exposure to those who are still stuck on this continent. As you know, we have this massive exodus of footballers elsewhere, and so this is an opportunity for more regular football for the home-based players, and B, for smaller countries who don't lose that many footballers to clubs overseas. But a League of African Nations on the same scale and in the same format as we've just had this one in Europe, I cannot see that happening in Africa, and I don't really see the point. And talk about it at the moment really has been fiction more than fact. Certainly from speaking to CAF officials, they've got no plans to bring in something similar.
And talking of that mass exodus, Lyle Foster joined that mass exodus. He's 18 years old. In the January transfer window, went from Orlando Pirates to AS Monaco. What has he shown, and this is from one of our listeners, what has he shown that has led Monaco to pick him up And do you have high hopes for him going forward?
I do, but I'm not sure that he's going to really make it. I mean, he's already 18, 19 years old. He's been on the books of Orlando Pirates for more than a season. He's had a handful of games, scored 1 or 2 goals. They really had very little faith in him. He's a big boy, a big tall player who I think physically matured a little bit before his time. Was on the radar of many European clubs at the age of 15, 16 because of his size and because of his exposure, both in trials and going off to Europe in the many little club tournaments that young kids these days who come through more formal structures are exposed to. But if you're not playing, to be frank, Norton, if you're not playing in the South African League at the age of 18, 19, I mean, what are you really going to be doing at Monaco when you go across? You know, your development physically is done already, and now you're going into a much more competitive pool. And if you can't get a game in the South African League, what are your chances in France? I really do hope that he makes it. He's a tall, physical boy, and in this sort of old centre forward fashion, it's rare to see those kind of players these days. And we could certainly do with a decent striker in the South African national side, but I'm not 100% convinced. I do hope for his sake and for our sake as a footballing nation, we get something like that up front. But I'm not holding my breath.
We're talking football in Africa and football in South America and players from over there playing in our leagues.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. Available on the BBC Sounds app. Up all night with Dotun Adebayo.
For our World Football phone-in this morning, Africa and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues. Call up and ask any question you want of our pundits. We've got the Legendino in South America. We've got the Springbokker Junior in Africa. The number to call them on is 08085 909 693. I've got the best questions so far tonight, and the privilege I have in this conversation is that I get to choose the questions, and generally I go for as many questions as possible, but sometimes we get so many it's not possible to read them all out. But it's always a pleasure to hear the question first, or to read the question first and know that this is one that you're both going to enjoy. I hope, in any case. It's not always the case, but I try and choose ones that I know that you can get your chops around. I'll read the PS out first, because the PS is so wonderful. Carl in Charlottesville, Virginia.
But it's not a PS then.
No, the question's not a PS, but that's why I'm doing it upside down. I'm going to give you the PS first, just to butter you up, if you like.
It's a BS then.
Upside down it would be in normal circumstances, but not in this case, I'm pleased to say. Don't worry, Carl, I got your back. Carl says, I've been emailing in and listening for 10 years, since I was 15. To say this show has been a major part of my life would be an understatement. Thank you for that, Carl. Really appreciate it. So the question is, he says Asia and Africa, but I think we can include South America on this as well. He says Asia and Africa, etc. Well, there you have it. South America is part of the etc. Have often seen a number of foreign coaches come in and work for national sides over the years, and currently such as Lippi, Eriksson, etc. Because of these imports, now here's the rub, because of these imports, how seriously has coaching in your regions failed to develop? I think Mark should go first on this.
Must.
No, I'm not a believer that the importation of foreign coaches on the whole has retarded the progress. Contrary to that, I think a lot of African countries, and it's more and more the policy of FAs these days, is that when a foreigner comes in, he doesn't come with a massive support staff as that some of them would like to do, that he uses a local or locals as assistants, and that they learn from him and that they feed off his knowledge and that they develop themselves as coaches. And it's often the case in Africa that a leading international figure comes in and he's followed by 2 or 3 local coaches who then, have developed under him and have learned from him and have been able to step up onto the stage. And that, in a way, is very positive development. It's often the case, though, that foreigners are brought in under circumstances where the team is failing, and it's seen as a sort of a quick fix. And I think that's probably where local coaches are let down. That's where a national team is struggling. The default panic button push is to go for the foreign coach instead of maybe to maybe look for someone else on the local scene. But I'm not in the camp that says foreigners have come in the main and sort of leached off the African continent and can't make it in Europe and therefore can't make it in Latin America and therefore turn to Africa to get some employment. I think there have been many, many, many more positives from these imports than there have been negatives, and they've had a big impact on African football in a very positive way.
Don't worry, Carl. It's typical withering Gleeson there, but I've got your back. And I haven't given him the punchline yet. He's going to be impressed at this one, because I think this is where you add a killer punchline in, Carl.
Killer blow.
Exactly.
Killer blow.
Are you ready for this, Mark?
Go ahead, sir.
Well, he says, as well, because of this, because remember his line of thinking is that these coaches from overseas may have withheld development of coaches in Africa, or at least, waylaid them. He says, as well, because of this, will any true innovation ever occur in regards to tactics, coaching, etc., due to this lack, that's his thinking, this lack of natural growth in the game because of these imported coaches? Will any sort of, if you like, innovation from within be held back or develop as a result in terms of tactics and coaching, etc.? It's not bad, is it? It's not bad for a 25-year-old who's been listening since he was 15.
Questions.
Exactly.
Great question.
No, it's a fair question and a valid question. I just wonder, coaching innovation, how much is coming from anywhere in a sense. There are a lot of young, exciting African coaches now doing a lot of work. They are perhaps not innovating in a sort of a completely new sense around ideas around the game, but rather picking and choosing some of the best and brightest from elsewhere. I mean, we all live in this tiny little global village now. We can all watch football from everywhere, and there are a lot of young, exciting African coaches dipping into the knowledge and dipping into the ideas that they see from around the world and adapting them to the African circumstances, molding them together and looking at what they've got in terms of team resources and applying what they think are necessary tactics or the appropriate tactics, and coming up with some really, really nice football. It's an exciting time to watch young African coaches at the moment, particularly in competitions like the Champions League at club level here on this continent. So I think it's all incredibly positive, and I think a lot of that stems from the influence that we've had from good coaches who come from Europe and from Latin America initially.
Yeah, it's a fair answer. What about from the South American perspective, Tim?
I think in general terms, exchange or interchange of ideas is always healthy, and the problem is when you don't get it. The question of foreign coaches through most of South America is, do we or do we not appoint someone from Argentina or Uruguay? And they're the oldest footballing cultures on the continent, and they're the big exporters of coaches. So, for your national team, do you bring in an Argentine or do you have a local? And sometimes, exactly as Mark has explained, having an Argentine or something, can prepare, and then bringing in a local who understands perhaps better the mentality of the players. And Venezuela is a classic case. And the rise of Venezuelan football started with an Argentine coach, Pastoriza, identified a group of players, worked with that group of players, and then he was replaced by a Venezuelan, Ricardo Paez, who understood the mentality and started sending the team out to win, not just to keep the score down, and the players really responded to that. But without the work that Pastoriza, the Argentine, had put in, I don't think Venezuela would have been able to get up to that level. A big example here, I think, of the value of being part of that exchange. I mean, one of the reasons that European football is leading the pack, obviously the main reason is money. But I think it's more than that. It's also because you've got all these countries close together. And you get a network of ideas. There's ideas bouncing around back and forth. Now, Brazil used to have that. And Brazil, who are historically the third force in South America after Uruguay and Argentina, Brazilian football developed with a lot of help from Uruguayan and Argentine coaches, and then came in the Hungarians, bringing in lots of new tactical ideas. And Brazil sifted through all of this and came up with the back four. And that back four was absolutely pioneering. And when they unleashed it in the 1958 World Cup, it helped them defend, it helped them attack. They didn't concede a goal till the semi-finals. Bringing an extra man back into the heart of the defence pushed the fullbacks out wider, and means that the fullbacks can become attackers as well. That's a fantastic tactical development, which is still totally current today. Now, that's a Brazilian one, but with huge help from foreign coaches. Now we have a situation where Brazil, or Brazilian football, is paying the price for so much success. It doesn't have that exchange anymore. It has very few foreign coaches, and it enjoys them failing. And Brazilian coaches, they're not wanted by Europe. There's no anti-South American bias. You can be a Chilean, you can be a Uruguayan, you can be an Argentine, you can get a top European club. Brazilians they don't want, because the European clubs don't rate Brazilian coaches. I think they are entirely correct about this. And I think the big problem that Brazilian football has now is the dismal quality of its coaches. It's difficult for them because they work in a very difficult context with a cluttered calendar, and they get sacked if they lose 3 games on the bounce. So the pressure is there to play things as conservatively as possible, as Mark saw when South Africa had a glut of Brazilian coaches. He saw how defensive that they were. But we're getting increasingly
still waking up from
now.
the coma.
Yeah, right. Increasingly now, we're getting dreadful results from Brazil. And Brazil, the South American Under-20 Championships, it's held every 2 years. In 3 of the last 4 tournaments, Brazil have not come in the top 4 and therefore not qualified for the World Under-20 Cup. This is Brazil, for crying out loud. With good players. I mean, the side that didn't qualify 2 years ago had Richarlison, had Lucas Paquetá, who's made such an impression at Milan. And this week, in the Libertadores, the qualifying round of the Libertadores, a giant of Brazilian football, São Paulo, were eliminated by a tiny little club from Argentina, Tajeres, who were in the 3rd division 5 years ago. They've got a 40-year-old in midfield. One player's salary from São Paulo would probably pay the entire team of Tajeres, and Tajeres win 2-0 on aggregate in relative comfort. Brazilian teams are consistently performing badly with good players, with better players than their rivals. And I think you have to point the finger at the coaches. And so often you see, because so much of football has moved on, and Brazil have stayed right stock still. So often you see Brazilian teams with a duo of centre-backs, and you saw this very clearly in the Under-20 Championships, a duo of centre-backs of Jack Charlton and another Jack Charlton. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The idea of your centre-back partnership is, all right, you can have one tall one to win the headers, but you have one alongside him who's quicker along the ground, who can play lower centre of gravity, and especially who can help bring the ball out, construct moves. That's why you have Jack Charlton and Bobby Moore. It doesn't make any sense, if you want to attack, to play Jack Charlton with Jack Charlton. But so often with these Brazilian teams, you see 2 giant centre-backs playing so deep on top of the goalkeeper, and it means that the side is stretched out. The gap between the defensive line and the forwards is like 70 or 80 metres. And because the gap is so big, you can't pass the ball up the field because your players are too far apart. So it's a big kick here and a big kick there, here a kick, there a kick, everywhere a big kick. And it's becoming painful to watch with good players.
I saw that one coming,
sorry, I just kind of thought that. No, well, I didn't. I kind of thought of it on the way, So I didn't see it coming. And the big problem here...
months to get that in.
And he finally did it, yeah.
I really haven't. And so the big problem is exactly the lack of exchange, the lack of influence of foreign coaches. But if I could just ping this one back to Mark, because I have some sympathy with the question that Carl raised so excellently. I've never been to Africa, much to my own regret. But looking at some of the African teams and the European coaches that they've appointed, I've often wondered if the European coaches have just imposed a kind of dull organisation, or tried to impose a dull organisation, while diminishing the joy and spontaneity that you expect from African football, and you're left with something quite ordinary and just a pale imitation of European football.
Yeah, they would have to have reined in a certain amount of cultural sort of perspective on football, I'd have thought.
Yes.
So is that a valid accusation, Mark?
It is a valid accusation, but I think there are more positives than negatives, and I think there are more who've as Dotun puts it, reined in some of the cultural extremities, and to a positive extent, and just brought more practically put, brought a little bit of discipline to the team and a little bit of structure, but at the same time recognized the football playing ability and allowed that to flourish within a bit more of a structured environment. And those have been the really successful coaches who've embraced and acknowledged the African flair and the African ability, but also then knocked off a few of the unpolished aspects of the African football. And I think that's those coaches who recognise that and embrace that have been the ones who've been very successful on this continent and have brought great positivity to coaching. And there've been more of them than I think those who've sort of imposed a blanket sort of negative de rigueur on the team. I think there are examples of that, but they've been more positive than negative.
I think structure.
Honestly, I'm a big fan of this one of the great Angelo Dundee. Remember Angelo Dundee was Muhammad Ali's trainer for all those years in the corner. Yeah. And Angelo Dundee used to say, if your fighter's small, make him smaller. If he's tall, make him taller. Use what you've got.
Yes.
So and I think that's absolutely vital. Trying to impose a kind of blanket formula is the way to mediocrity.
Yeah. And I think that's also key in the African context, because you're not working. You're working with quite a lot of flair and talent, but you're not working with great resources player wise. And I'm not talking about off the field, logistics and stuff like that. Most African sides, if you study them, even the most successful sides, not really that many good football players, and there's the depth. The lack of depth has always been the problem for African sides when they go to tournaments like the World Cup. 6 or 7 decent players, numbers to fill up the team, and then absolutely nothing on the bench. And that I think you must also be cognizant of.
Mm. When you said
how can we explain?
Good.
How can we explain Cameroon in 1990? Because they were ahead of the curve, weren't they? The Cameroon game against England.
Wasn't that a French
England
coach?
Were told.
Was that a French coach?
No, it was a Russian. It was a Russian coach, but he had absolutely no say in what was going on. They were sort of playing by committee. I think Cameroon 1990.
England were told, Mark, before that game, it was Howard Wilkinson who was the spy, England spy. England were told that they had a bye into the semi-finals.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for Howard Wilkinson's thinking was that he didn't rate them at all. And they were without three or four players, so they had to bring in off the bench 3 or 4 players, and they were terrific. They played a wonderful game. So how can we explain that, and where has that gone?
Yeah, no, that Cameroon side a real anomaly, and there are very little positive lessons to take out of their experience. They did not have a single friendly warm-up game, international, ahead of that tournament. They went into camp in the old Yugoslavia and played a couple of club teams. They were a camp in absolute disarray. They were riven by disputes between players. There was the massive fallout between the key goalkeepers in Kono and Joseph Antoine Bell, who didn't participate. He was the number one. They were absolutely set up for failure, and it's the great beauty of this game. And and long may it stay unexplained. They beat Argentina in that opening game, and they just do not look back. I mean, maybe little incidents along the way contributed. Rene Higuita messing up and allowing Miller to score, and that's the other thing that we forget is the president of the country, Paul Biya, who's still in power, by the way, imposed Roger Miller at the age of 38 onto that side. He was retired. He was playing football on the French island of Reunion. He was picking up a little bit of a sort of post-career pension. And here is a man who steps onto the world stage and absolutely becomes one of the great World Cup icons.
Oh, the greatest dance move that the World Cup has ever seen.
Exactly.
When he scored.
So it is by no means the blueprint on how to be successful. It's a complete anomaly, and long may it stay a massively unexplained mystery, because it's one of the beauties of world football, and it's why we love the game so much.
We've only spent the last 20 minutes.
Would be like asking a magician, how'd you do it? I don't want to know how he did it. I just want to know that he's capable of doing
actually,
it.
I do want to know how he did it, how he sawed that woman in half, because otherwise he needs to go to court and explain himself.
On this occasion, I think the magicians themselves didn't know how they did it anyway.
Look, we've spent the last 20 minutes talking about coaching. I'm just going to ask one quick question. You don't have to deliberate on it, because it might be a stupid question. When you talked about structure and discipline, Mark, in terms of African football and what the coaches from outside can bring into it, see, that was exactly my line of thinking, that the very little African football that I've, from Africa rather than internationally, played internationally, that I've seen and heard the commentary on, they don't tend to sort of talk as much, if I'm correct, I could be wrong, about formation, 4-4-2, 4-3-3, I just wonder whether all those old regimented formations, like the sort of Protestant work ethic of the 4-4-2 or the more sort of continental flair of the 4-3-3 actually means much within the context of African football.
Yeah,
if it's Gleeson doing
days,
the commentary, he's talking about what the linesman's wearing.
These days there's very little to choose between, the way teams are set up in Africa and elsewhere, because it's such, the game is so much more structured and in a way a little bit overcoached. I mean, the African Champions League as a product is fairly dull, and I think it's probably true, Tim, of the sort of early stages of the Copa Libertadores as well. It sort of wallows in mediocrity until it gets to the sort of interesting phase near the end. It's certainly nothing on the group phase of the Champions League, where you've got sort of, your cutting edge world leading players. But a lot of those stereotypes of African football are no longer true. It's the world game has long arrived on our continent, and we're perhaps struggling a little bit just in terms of playing quality more than anything else.
So there's a question for the dude. Which one of you two is the dude?
Gleeson. There's the dude.
There's only one
straight
man.
Out of Big Lebowski, the Gleeson.
A gold medallion around his furry chest. That's Vickery.
Well, I can reveal all.
As the dude says in the Big Lebowski, that's just like your opinion, man.
I can reveal all. Question for the African dude.
Yes.
Is that with a PS or
not? Anyway, no PS this time, and no upside down either. So why isn't Mauritius allowed to play on the continent?
Mauritius is allowed to play on the continent.
Okay. That's the end of that, dude.
That's that one.
Gosh, I was hoping it would be a longer answer than that, but
he still doesn't like the Eagles, though, does he?
You're never going to get into this.
I love that film.
Yeah,
I love that film.
Do you see that there's a nice beer commercial now with our Big Lebowski back drinking a certain brand we can't mention on the BBC, but they've brought him back as a character in a beer commercial. It's quite funny, actually.
I haven't seen that on this way. Have you seen that, Tim?
Send it. No, I haven't. So, I live in Brazil. Put it on YouTube and put it on Twitter and send it to us, please. I'd love to see it.
Talking of Paraguay, by the way, Almiron looked as brave as a lion in the short time he was on for Newcastle this week, says our listener. Brave as a lion?
I've got high hopes. Whoops, there goes another rubber tree plant. I've got high hopes.
Well, I was thinking lion. Surely that's the wrong continent, isn't it, Mark?
Well, if you look at all the English crests, you'd think that the lions actually existed on the island.
That was a low point. You
did those feet?
You did not have to
pause in ancient times.
Yes, exactly. Listen, mate, once upon a time, we had a lion heart. He was a king as well. He died, yeah. Anyway, that's another story.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
This is the World Football Phoning. Africa and South America, the countries that we're focusing on, and players from over there playing in our leagues as well. So we've got Mark Gleeson, the Springbokker Junior, who's in Cape Town. We've got the Legendino, who's Tim Vickery, who is in Rio. And we've got your questions as well. Julie says, by the way, I wondered if Tim and Mark have teams in their areas like my old dad's Sunderland, for whom we need a Division 1.5, as they've spent my whole life getting promoted to the top division only to plummet back down the following year. So yo-yo clubs. Who's a yo-yo club in South America?
Well, there are quite a few in Brazil, and we used to have a case where if you'd been champion, you couldn't go down. That is the Brazilian conception of hierarchy as applied to football. You know, if you, it's.
So what happens if you're bottom of the league? If you're the champion, what actually happens?
If
practically,
well, no, that's gone now. That's from a few years ago. That's more than 25 years ago. But you know, I remember taking journos from Ireland and England, so on, to meet the old timers who would say, no, obviously, you know, a great club shouldn't go down. It's, you know, that kind of hierarchy thing. But that's gone now. And if you finish in the bottom four, you go down unless you can find a legal loophole. And boy, do they look to find legal loopholes that the opposition have fielded an ineligible player. We want the points, and so on. In recent times, on some big clubs have become yo-yo clubs. On Vasco da Gama, very, very nearly went down at the end of last year, and they've been down 3 times in the last 10 years. So they've become a big yo-yo club. And one of the problems I think that Brazilian football faces is that a lot of the clubs are big regionally. When the state championships, one for each of the 27 states, when they used to be important, those clubs can continue to be important, winning a state championship. Now the state championships are irrelevant. So there aren't that many big titles to go around, and that means it's difficult for all of the clubs that are historically big to stay big. And with football developing in more of the regions of the country, some of the historic greats, like on here in Rio, like Vasco, like Fluminense, like Botafogo, they face a struggle, I think. Vasco have already become a yo-yo club in recent years, and there could be some other big clubs undergoing the same fate.
In South Africa, we have a team called Jomo Cosmos, who are perpetually up and down, and they were the champions back in the late 80s. One of the great sort of stories of South African football, and particularly the end of apartheid and the changes in this country, was the footballer Jomo Sono, who, because of apartheid, didn't really get a chance to go and play internationally, despite his great skills. And he eventually got to America and played for New York Cosmos, and he was a teammate of Franz Beckenbauer and Pele, and then went on to play with Toronto, where he won the old North American Soccer League. So he was a great hero in South Africa, but didn't really have much of an international profile because of the country's isolation, the fact that there was no national team. But he made enough money over there to come back and to buy the franchise of the leading white club in those days. So it was a very symbolic act in the mid 80s, when apartheid was still very, very strong politically, but maybe socially now beginning to suffer some knocks. Was this black icon coming back from a career in the United States with the cash that he'd made and spending his money to buy the franchise of a sort of the team from Johannesburg, who had the majority white supporters, but was sort of, you know, beginning to hit on bad times and were available for sale, and just the symbolism of it all made Jomo Sono a massive figure in South Africa. He still is today, but unfortunately, the club that he then renamed Jomo Cosmos, his first name, and Cosmos as in New York Cosmos, he used the same logo as the American side. That side had some great success in the 90s, but then sort of faded a little bit, and now they're more the subject of ridicule as they yo-yo their way between the second division and the top flight. But he remains a massive figure in this country for that and many other interesting things in a fascinating career at a fascinating time in history as well.
Would he have been Jomo Sono? Would he have been the best South African footballer not to, or to have been affected by apartheid? Not
That's a massive debate in this country, but he's one of two. The other one is a player who sadly passed away a few years ago called Asen Selengwe. He's actually in the American Hall of Fame, and again the same profile, unable to really go to Europe because of apartheid, because there was no opportunity, and landed up playing in the North American Soccer League. South Africa's top exports in the 70s and 80s, because of the fact that there was no national team, went to play in the States at the time when the NASL was doing really, really well, and when it was attracting all the the names like Cruyff and Best and Beckenbauer and Pele, etc. So it was the destination of choice. So Asen Selengwe is actually in the American Hall of Fame now for his contribution there. He really was an absolutely super player. His stats numbers are better than Jomo Sono. He was a very quiet, shy man, so he doesn't have the personality of Sono, who is still a big figure in our football. But the two of them, I think, would have had some impact on the world stage had they been given an opportunity. And it's always a great debate here in this country. How would so and so have done had it not been for apartheid? And that's across all sports. I think those of an older generation, I include myself, do have this chat quite often amongst colleagues and contemporaries as to I wonder what so and so would have become of so and so had they had the opportunity. It's sad, but it is part of our history.
And Tim,
where does Albert Johansson fit in the pantheon? And why wasn't he a trailblazer? Because when he worked, didn't it functioned for Leeds United? Why didn't that open the doors for more black South Africans to go to England at that time?
Well, first of all, you've got to understand the racial makeup of South Africa. But Albert Johansson would have been classified in the apartheid days as coloured. In other words, he's not black.
Basil D'Oliveira with the cricket.
Yes, exactly. Not black African, and primarily because he didn't speak a black African language. So, and coloured people still in this country are sort of a separate racial group who speak Afrikaans, the derivative of Dutch, of course, and English, don't have an African language. So he came from that racial group, and therefore, and they're a fairly small minority along with the white people and those of Indian descent. So he wasn't really symbolic or wasn't really an icon for the black community. Although in the 1960s, the coverage of his success in England would have also been fairly limited. The apartheid structures in those days certainly didn't want to trumpet the success of a black man on an international forum like Johansson had at Leeds. The first black man to play in an FA Cup final, etc. It's only in later years that he's kind of earned his place in South African sporting history. But there were a lot of people like that. Precious McKenzie was a famous weightlifter for England from the coloured community in South Africa. Basil D'Oliveira is a great example. There are probably 5 or 6 more, but there were there were quite a few who played in the English league in the 50s and 60s. Bill Perry from Blackpool. Gerald Francis played for Leeds United. They all came from sort of the racial fringes of South African society and got the opportunity in England that they wouldn't have got back in South Africa. It's an absolutely fascinating history. You could go on all night.
What about the Stein brothers who played at Luton Town?
Yes, and their father. Well, they were born in Britain. I think that the older one, Brian, was born in Cape Town, but maybe Mark, the younger one, was born in Britain. But their father was a great anti-apartheid fighter who went into exile in the UK, his sons grew up. There's another brother, I think his name is Edwin, who became a fairly successful coach and one of the few first black coaches of a lower league club or a top non-league club in Britain.
And they would have been described as Cape Coloureds, would they?
Yes. That's the racial classification of the old days.
And then what about Gary Bailey at Man United, the South African keeper?
No, Gary Bailey's father, Roy Bailey, was an Englishman who played for Ipswich in their championship-winning side of the early 60s, and like many of his kind, came out to play in South Africa at the end of his career and then continued coaching. Gary, I think, was actually born in Sweden. His mother is Swedish. I'm confusing him with Richard Gough. But Gary was born in England, came out to South Africa as a young age. I mean, his football formation was in South Africa. He certainly speaks like we do, accent-wise, etc. But he's not South African born, and he obviously qualified to play for England. And when he got the opportunity to go back, his dad got him a trial at Ipswich, which he failed, and then he came home again, and then his dad kicked him up the proverbial and sent him back, and he succeeded the second time round at Manchester United. He's also sort of a different profile, as it were.
But nevertheless, so you're not impressed with my knowledge?
No, your knowledge is fantastic. I've been impressed from the first day I started talking to you, Doctor.
I have to confess, thanks to our listener who sent me those suggestions, nothing to do with me at all.
If it was Shakespearean characters, you wouldn't have needed any help at all, would you?
Oh, by the way, going back to that, because before we went to the 3 o'clock news, Mark did suggest that it was the same bloke what had a lion heart that was buried under a car park. No. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by that son of York, Mark. That's the different bloke. That's Richard III, the one with the twisted spine.
But where did you lot get all the lions from? That's what I'd like to know.
It's a good question.
It's good. It's a good point. Yeah.
I think what used to happen in the old days was they went off to, the Far East usually and came back with a lion or two in a cage. And so maybe they came back with 3 at one point and they said, yeah, that's a good...
Cultural appropriation.
Exactly. It's not the
same.
It's
like St. George. It's like St. George was like from Malta or something,
Yeah.
Something like that. And there's a club, Corinthians in Sao Paulo, a huge club. Their motto is St. George. Their centre is Parque St. George. Their old historical ground is St. George's Park. And I've been on Brazilian TV saying you can't have him. We colonised him first. You can't have St. George.
Well done.
St. George and the Dragon and all that. He's ours.
You keep flying that flag in Brazil, mate. And all of a sudden there's been a plethora of other South African or Southern African players in our league. Bruce Grobler, of course, traditional Zimbabwe. Gil Heron, the original senior, played for Celtic in the 50s.
Colin Villione.
He was brilliant.
Yes.
He was Aston Villa, wasn't he? Or Leicester.
Ipswich.
Ipswich, that was
Ipswich.
it. Yeah.
And a bit of Chelsea as well.
Do you know why I remember him? Is when we used to collect those cards, the football cards.
That's right.
But you got a strip
Manchester
of bubblegum
City.
with it. Yes, I think you're right, actually. It is Man City. Yeah, God, your memories...
So with a surname like Villione, that must be Afrikaans, isn't it? So that's a completely that's a different story.
Yeah, completely different story. And there were quite a few. Look, there are a lot of people. There are a lot of English-speaking South Africans now, obviously, over the years with Afrikaans surnames, and he would have come from that community. So his dad might have been Afrikaans, and his mother English-speaking, and he, maybe had sort of English uncles, and so football rather than rugby was his sport of choice, breaking the stereotype. And he went over on trial as youngsters did in those days, and as youngsters still do. And he became an England international.
Yeah. Now, does that mean you said that the regime would never give any platform to Johansson and what he did abroad, but did the regime give platform to Colin Villione and what he was doing in English football?
Yeah, there would have been more. There was blanket coverage anyway of English football in those days, and he would have been mentioned, of course, in more than just in passing. But what I find interesting when you go back into the archives, and I spent a lot of time reading the papers of the 60s and 70s, is that here is a very obvious South African with a massively South African surname doing well. There was never any journalist who went across and sort of did a big feature on him and big article and trumpeted his South Africanness. There was very little of that sort of nationalism in the papers, because it was always bigger and better football wise over in the UK, and they were obviously delighted he was doing well, and he got a lot of mentions, but no real trumpeting of his South Africanness, which I always found quite interesting. That the news outlook on those days was a lot different to these days. I mean, our footballers overseas now, we jump at the opportunity to go and cover them. That's actually a question about Brazilian media too. I mean, do they, are they on sort of every moment, every breath that young Gabriel Jesus jaws, is that covered liberally in the Brazilian press, or are they sort of ambivalent a little bit once the player leaves their shores? I get that that's very much the way it was here in South Africa in the 70s and 80s.
No, there's huge pride when they do well. Like Vinicius Junior at the moment with Real Madrid, huge pride in what he's doing. There's a distance from these players when they're playing for the national team that loses. At that point, they're a bunch of mercenaries who've turned their back on our experience. They don't understand what it's like to be Brazilian anymore. But while they're winning, or while they're doing exceptionally well for their club sides, huge pride. In fact, there's a terrific debate going on at the moment. There's a football magazine, and it's just trying to drum up business, because Lord knows these are hard times for publications. So what it's put on its cover is Neymar is the best Brazilian since Pelé. Now you could that really is lighting a touch paper and retreating to an unsafe distance, because there is no safe distance with that one. The debate that's sparking up. So credit, I suppose, to the magazine. It's achieved all of
they knew their market.
Yes.
Yeah, they know their market. Okay, lots of other questions. Oh, by the way, has the election of Bolsonaro in Brazil impacted football in any way, apart from the fact that lots of high-profile current and ex-footballers endorse him?
Yeah, well, I wonder for how long they'll be endorsing him. It's a little bit Calamity Jane, his government, and you wonder how long he'll be around. Even his entourage, suspicious of the vice president, who's a former general. It is amusing, I suppose, as long as you don't have to live here. Impact on Brazilian football, a bit too early to say, although there's a huge possibility that one of the big sponsors is a national bank, big sponsor of teams that seems to be pulling out of football, and that will have an effect on football finances. Also, you wonder, with some of the labour legislation that they want to bring in, all the 0 hours contracts and that, throwing more people into a situation of precariousness. You wonder if this will just drive more people out of the stadiums because they won't be able to afford the prices.
Okay, we know that Mark is the dude. Who's the boss in this conversation?
That's you.
No. I'm not in this. No. Well, it's
it was Diana Ross, I think. I don't think she's here tonight.
Of course, she's always the boss. But in her absence, is it you or Gleeson?
Well, my record from taking penalty kicks is probably worse than Diana Ross's, so it has to be Gleeson.
Mark, who's the boss, you or Tim?
There's only one boss, sir, and he's got a hungry heart. No, it's got to be Tim.
It's got to be Tim. Yes. That's good. It's good. Not bad.
That's not boss. That's boss. That's boss.
If you
got
like.
a wife and kid in Baltimore, Jack. I went out for a ride and I never went back. I'm not a great fan, but I think that's one of the two most fantastic lines in the history of music. Got a wife and a kid in Baltimore, Jack. I went out for a ride and I never went back.
Well, I can reveal all. I can reveal all. Message for the boss, Gleeson. Percy Tau signed for Brighton.
Amen.
No, I'm just impressed that not only is he the dude, he's also the boss. We've got a boss that's a dude.
I can think of a few other four
Can you imagine
words to call him?
Can you imagine how I'd be doing if I had a gold medallion and a furry chest like that?
Yes, that's all that's missing from this conversation. You need the hairy chest to go with it as well. So, message for the boss, Gleeson. Percy Tau signed for Brighton and was then loaned to Union in the Belgium Second Division. Is he a big deal in South Africa?
Yeah, he's our best player at the moment, and he's done very well in Belgium. They beat Anderlecht in the Belgian Cup, and they made it to the semi-final, the second division side. They're actually owned by the same guy who owns Brighton. I think his name is Tony Bloom. I stand under correction. But obviously, for work permit issues, Tau doesn't have enough caps. South Africa is not... Its FIFA ranking is not high enough to help his cause with the work permit issue in the UK. So he's gone off to the Belgian second division, where he's patently too good. The side, I think, are going to just miss out on potential promotion, but it's been good for him as a youngster to go and have a sort of settling in season and regular football time, albeit the Belgian second division. which you wonder about sometimes. But I think Brighton have got something special on their hands there.
First for news and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live. Up all night with Dotun Adebayo.
It's that time of day to all get together and start singing sa la la la, sa la la la, sa la la la. Here's Marwan in Alexandria in Egypt. Hello.
Hello, Don.
Did you hear what I did there?
Yeah, I heard it, and to be fair, I love singing for Salah, but we need a new Egyptian original song for Salah. We lack it here in Egypt. We sing English, the Mo Salah song, which is English. We need an genuine Egyptian one.
Yeah. How would it go? How would it go? Any suggestions?
I don't know, but
Something by Omar Sharif?
well, maybe, but he's one of our heroes, so maybe we can get it on in the mix.
How about Jonathan Richman? Something by Jonathan Richman. You don't know Jonathan Richman?
No.
Or the Bangles.
Oh, the Bangles, indeed, yeah. Jonathan Richman did Walk Like an Egyptian.
Oh.
No, that's the Bangles.
Nice.
Oh, that's the Bangles.
Jonathan Richman did Egyptian reggae.
Egyptian reggae, that was us, sorry, got him confused there.
I need to know a lot of things, actually, yeah. I'm still young, so, yeah.
Don't worry. You have a listen to the Bangles and Jonathan Richman, and you should be able to get something together.
Okay.
Anyway, let's talk Mo Salah, Liverpool, Africa, South America, whatever you want to talk about. What's your question?
So it's not a lot about Liverpool, as I wish I could talk more about Liverpool. I can't shut up about Liverpool, but it's more about Salah. So recently, it's a bit of an explanation I will do. Recently, Salah made a post in Arabic in his or tweet on his Twitter account saying about the two major clubs in Egypt, which are Al Ahly and Zamalek, that their fans are. He cannot believe that his fans, their fans, are throwing insults in Twitter, and it's getting ridiculous. So there is a bit of a debate and a bit of a post in Facebook that I saw today that made me a bit uncomfortable, and I was mad. Here in Egypt, the fans are about 10 or 20% focusing about their team and what we will play next and who we will play, and 80% they are insulting the other team. The biggest two is Al Ahly and Zamalek, and about 90% of fans support one of these. So it's a bit annoying, and it's not fans here are not getting football like sort of entertainment and escapism. Sometimes they take it like the be-all and end-all of everything in life, so it can be kind of annoying. So he said that, and there are a lot of backlash from some of the people that he gone to England and he's seen how fans in England react to football matches, and he's like insulting his origin and his fans in his origin country. I found it weird to think that way. Actually, you cannot defend something that's not good. I know there were problems with fans in Europe in the 80s, and it was a long time ago. So there are still problems, but not as they were in the past, and that's what you look for. You look to be better, and Salah has a big influence, so he takes his social media accounts to say that and say his opinion, to try to change something, to try to influence those fans to take the football as it is and love the game and love and entertained by the teams, not rather insult each other out and like make it a feel of hatred, not that we come together and love the game.
You see what you're doing, Marwan? You're tying yourself up in knots because you're not going for the question. And we could be here all day. So you're nearly there. Okay.
I'm sorry. My question is, what do you think about all the situations, especially Mark? About the things of Turki Al-Sheikh and what he's doing, the weird thing he's doing in Egypt. And what do you think about Turki Al-Sheikh? He's the founder of Pyramids, the new big thing in Egypt.
Okay, I didn't really care about him. I just love the way you said it. One more time.
Turki Al-Sheikh.
Turki
Al-Sheikh.
Okay,
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's
No,
chic.
it's beautiful, man. It's beautiful. I'm not knocking it. Genuinely not knocking it. It's love the way you said it. I was like, wow, who's that? Who's got that name? Can I have it?
Yeah, it's a nice name, actually. So I know I want to know your opinion about the situation and how it's handled in different parts of the world. It's in South America and South Africa, in Africa, in Europe, in everywhere. Yeah.
Mark.
Well, two parts to that question. On the emergence of Pyramid FC, which is this brand new club in Egypt that's liberally financed and threatening to break the long dominance of the Ali Zamalek rivalry, is absolutely fascinating. I think it'll be a breath of fresh air for Egyptian football, because as Marwan suggests, it's fairly toxic there. The rivalry between Zamalek and Ali is absolutely fascinating. It's long-standing. It's one of the great rivalries of world football, but it can be overpoweringly, pervasively toxic, and at times I think it sort of retards Egyptian football in the way that Marwan describes. That everyone obsesses about the two sides, and it's unhealthy. So this new club, I think, will be. Should be welcomed. I'm a little bit skeptical. We've seen the emergence of, supposed third forces in the past in Egyptian football and elsewhere in the Arab world, and it hasn't really lasted all that long. But I think the jury's still out. Let's see what happens. But I think it's a positive development, and I think what Salah has said on social media. It should be regarded as a positive too, and I think it's refreshing that because you don't see that all that often. A high-profile footballer, trying to bring some perspective and just sort of take some of the nutters out of the equation in his home country, because he has a realization that football can be so much more than just this toxic rivalry between Ali and Zamalek.
Yeah, that's part 1 and 2. Hopefully, Marwan, you're happy with that. And thank you for the call. Call up any time, as you know. This is.
Can I do this from this fan rivalry thing?
Right,
because
yeah. From South America as well.
I fear about social media. I fear that social media just stokes this, because it gives voice to idiots and people who are emotionally unbalanced. Some very clear examples here in Brazil just in the last couple of weeks, because we've had a number of tragedies. Obviously, the Flamengo fire last Friday that killed 10, 14, 15, 16-year-olds. And they're great local rivals, Vasco da Gama. They played a game on Wednesday night, and I thought it was a beautiful initiative. And Vasco took the field. On their shirts, they put the Flamengo badge in solidarity with their great rivals. Beautiful. However, this has set off a huge political ruction inside the club. There's a few hundred. They're called conselheiros, kind of esteemed members of the club. 102 of them have signed. 102 of them have signed a letter repudiating the fact that Vasco put the Flamengo's badge on their shirt in solidarity with this tragedy.
This is Vasco fans. They're Vasco fans.
Yeah.
Okay.
These are more than fans. These are esteemed club members. These are on on a huge board of directors. It's absolutely lamentable. How can you stoop that low to repudiate this act of solidarity? And another one where there's a big environmental disaster in the state of Minas Gerais, and the death toll, it's going to rise, but it's already around 170, and it's going to be more. It's an environmental disaster when a kind of barrier burst. The area is just flooded by mud. And there's one player, there's the local derby in the nearby capital in Belo Horizonte is Cruzeiro against Atlético Mineiro. And one player of Cruzeiro, attacking midfielder Thiago Neves, he put on social media they were just about to play each other. The game really shouldn't have gone ahead. I disagreed with the game going ahead in the wake of the tragedy, just a couple of days after the tragedy. But the game went ahead, and he put on social media that the Atletico defence is going to break like the dam, like the barrier in that disaster. A dreadful taste. How on earth can you do that? It's one of those moments when you think that, these people should be banned from having social media. To put a toxic opinion like that out there is utterly lamentable. But I worry where social media is going to take this, because I think it keeps upping the ante.
What about this question, Tim? Brazilian keeper Gabriel Brazao has been linked with a move to both Man United and Arsenal recently. Tell us the lowdown on him. I know he's young, but what type of keeper is he, and why are these clubs looking at him? That's from Amit in Toronto.
I don't really know a lot about him, and he was in the under-20 squad that just failed to qualify. But he didn't play. He wasn't the first choice. I think he was the third choice of the three from Cruzeiro. So and he hasn't. He's not a first team keeper for his club, and I haven't seen a lot of him. But I can tell you the fella who was the first choice, Felipe of Grêmio. It looks to me, I think he was, even though Brazil were terrible, he was the best keeper in the competition. In the kind of Peter Schmeichel mould, a big, commanding keeper, fills the whole goal. He is one that clubs should definitely be looking at. There are little things he has to work on. His kicking's not particularly good. His coming out of his goal, perhaps he could work on that as well. There's a huge physical block in the goal, athletic as well. He's the Brazilian young keeper I think that clubs should be having a look at.
We've got Felix in Aberdeen with us as well. Hello, Felix. Hello, was it Felix in Aberdeen?
Yes, it is.
Hi, you're right.
I'm fine, thanks.
Good to speak to you. You got a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is to, I think, is it Mark, your analyst from South Africa?
We call him the dude, and sometimes we call him the boss.
Right, fair enough. Yeah. My question is about the CAF Champions League match between Esperance of Tunisia and Orlando Pirates this week.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I was surprised. I watched the match, bits of the match, and I realized that the crowd levels were not that big. Maybe for those who don't know, these are big clubs in African football, certainly in terms of finance and stature, certainly over the last 20 years. And I was surprised why the crowd levels were so low. I don't know whether there are any issues regarding ban of supporters going to the stadium.
You've hit the nail on the head. That was the second game behind closed doors for Esperance after the Champions League final against Ali at the end of last year. There were attacks on the Ali fans, and so they had a 2-match ban. Ban on fans, and that's why there were absolutely no spectators in the stadium on what was it, Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah. Right, and my question is, usually I know that in African football, the North African matches at the Champions League or African Champions League version are played either on Friday or Saturday. And then if you come to West Africa or South Africa, for instance, it's usually Saturdays or maybe even Sundays. I'm surprised why they are now playing it during the middle of the week, because historically in Africa there's been a problem. I mean, with the
floodlights,
the economic situation as it is for supporters, certainly away supporters, to travel and go and follow their clubs. And I wonder why they're playing it during the middle of the week, because it's going to be even more difficult for those who have, employment to leave their places of work to go and watch these matches. I don't. What's the rationale behind changing
Felix,
to midweek?
It's time that you got yourself out of your Scottish exile there in Aberdeen and went home for a holiday. It sounds like you're missing out on all the different innovations that have come into the African game. But what's happened with the Champions League is it's really just a function of the crowded calendar. And it's also the fact that the leagues, the domestic leagues, are so big these days that they really do want to keep playing domestically on the weekends where the big television deals are, and so they've asked over the last couple of years. The Champions League has more matches during midweek. So this is, I think, the third year that we've had midweek games. I think of the 6 group rounds, 4 of them are on weekends and 2 of them are midweek. And this was a midweek, one of the midweek rounds. The Champions League also has changed now that it's only played on a Friday and a Saturday when it's on a weekend, and Sunday is reserved for Africa's other club competition, the Confederations Cup, and they've also designated a specific kickoff time. So it's 3:00, 6:00, and 9:00. So it's all designed for television. I think it's good innovations, it's good marketing. I could understand why you would have turned your TV on a Tuesday in Aberdeen and looked at these 2 teams and thought, okay, I know those names, I want to watch this match, and then thought to yourself, hang on, it's Tuesday afternoon, why are they playing? A, and B, where's the crowd? So your questions are 100% valid and fully understandable. But it's time you went home, sir.
Yeah.
Well said.
Felix, don't forget to send a postcard, mate. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking that, even if it's for television, it's going to be very difficult to compete with the European Champions League. Because this week, for instance, there were some big matches in Europe on Tuesdays and Wednesday, and you wonder, African viewers, even back home on the continent, would they prefer to watch Real Madrid or Dortmund on the television, or would they prefer to watch Pirates and
That's a very good point that you're making, but you're opening a huge can of worms now. Do we change our football program to accommodate television viewing of European product, or do we go head to head with them? Do we try and make our product as good as theirs and it competes? It's a whole new can of worms. But it's a very good point you make. It's luckily the Champions League matches from Europe this week were basically 10 o'clock Central African time, so it's fairly late in the evening. There were no Champions League matches, local Champions League matches going head to head with them. But the clash will come, and the television audience, will head more towards the European product because it is top quality football. But I don't think there is ever going to be a time where Africa is going to sort of kowtow to the European television schedule. I think politically that will not happen.
Yeah, Simon in Manchester is studying sports journalism at Salford Uni, which is just down the road from where I used to live. I listen to the show as a podcast, and the show is a great inspiration while I'm studying to become a journalist, he says. My question is for Tim. I was wondering, what futures do Manchester United South American players have, such as Fred, Rojo, Alexis and Andreas? I was also wondering, how is United as a whole viewed in South America?
As a huge club going through something of a hard time with Alexis Sanchez, and I do worry that he was burnt out between 13 and 17 when he went 5 years without a holiday, because there was always an international tournament at the end. And Chile kept on making progress. So you wonder how much that took out of him. Rojo, I've never really seen him as a United player. I don't really know why they bought him. Andreas Pereira is not a player I know that well, because he's grown up in Belgium. He's got a Brazilian parent, so he wants to play for Brazil, has played for Brazil in friendlies, but isn't particularly well known and hasn't had a lot of opportunities. And Fred, I worry about. I think he's a good player, but I think he's gone to perhaps the wrong club at the wrong time. I think he could work there. He's lovely engine, nice left foot. But it's been this year. It's been a difficult collective context in which to find your feet at United, and yet again, so often United's dabblings in the South American markets have gone wrong. But I think in the long term that's more coincidence than anything else, and it'll go right. I've always seen. I know a lot of people think this is sacrilege, but I've always seen a little bit of George Best in Neymar. It's the flexibility of the ankles. You know, the way that you look at some photos of George Best playing, and he seems to be at like 45 degrees. Those ankles were so flexible, and Neymar's got something of that around him. I watched him at Old Trafford once playing for Brazil in the 2012 Olympics. So you just wonder, there aren't that many clubs who could afford him if he wants to leave Paris Saint-Germain. Neymar at United would be interesting, wouldn't it?
It would. What about João Felix at Benfica and Pedrinho of Corinthians? Mazuba wants to know.
Well, Pedrinho there's been a lot of hype around him, and so far I think it's very, very early. There's certainly some talent there. I'm heartened by the fact that Vinicius Junior and Lucas Paquetá have come straight out Brazilian football. Arthur as well at Barcelona, but certainly in the case of Vinicius and Lucas Paquetá, they've looked better players than they looked in Brazil. You put them in a better collective context, surrounded by better players and with more proximity amongst the lines, more options for a pass and so on. And Vinicius has a partnership with Benzema that looks wonderful. I'm heartened by how well that they're doing. That gives me hope for the likes of Pedrinho coming to Europe. But I think it's a little bit premature at the moment. João Felix at Benfica, I don't really know.
Wes in Portland, Oregon says he's happy to call in sometime and ask a question. He still hasn't done that after all these years, Wes. Anyway, he says that he started listening to the World Football Phone in 4 years ago, almost to the day. He was home for his grandmother's funeral and his brother introduced him to the show. It brought us, he says, him and his brother, some joy in a time of mourning, and it strengthened our footballing bond over the years. I think about my brother every time I hear this show and the next great conversation we will have. Thank you for that. My question is, do either of you have a footballing memory or moment that brings you closer to someone, that you think about somebody in particular when you revisit that footballing moment? I don't know. Mark, do you want to go first?
I feel a lot closer to Tim Vickery since I've been termed the dude.
Yeah, that's not quite a footballing moment, though, to be fair. And you still haven't got the medallion to go with it. But, yeah, a footballing moment.
I did get called a dude on Irish TV the other day because they woke me up at something like 6 o'clock in the morning, blazing sunshine. Didn't have time to get my contact lenses in.
Blazing
so I was wearing
sunshine in Ireland.
Pair of
blazing sunshine in Ireland.
Well, I'm in Rio and they're in Ireland. That's the way it works.
I know that's the way it works.
Yeah. It's called broadcasting internationally, Dotton. And I'm wearing a rather fab pair of Steve Marriott-inspired sunglasses, so I got called a dude there. But I'm very happy to cede the title to Gleeson.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about a footballing moment now, which is what I call ask for? Tim, do you want to go first?
Well, I think it's hard for journos to do this, because our experience of the game, and we've been doing it for so long, our experience of the game tends to be solitary in the sense that we're thinking of our own articles while we're watching the game. I do miss that. I miss that, that joy of celebrating a goal as a supporter. That's something that I feel a little bit out of touch with. So I'm struggling to think of a moment. I'm sure I could think of one, but I'd have to go a long way back. I'm being a journo. I think Gleeson will back this one up. It does change your relationship with the game. Don't you agree, Mark? Dude?
Yeah, 100%. And it must have been tough anyway in your time when you were a supporter celebrating goals at White Hart Lane, because were there many in the 70s and 80s?
Well, we had a certain Gary Lineker, the end of the 90s, who did score a few. Yeah.
I'd have to go for my football moment featuring the Gents, going to see Charlton play with him. And a lot of people have been asking me in social media about how he is, because he had an operation the other day. And I'm sure it went smoothly. I haven't heard anything yet. And if and when I do, I will let you know. Anyway, I think it was one of those where we were winning I think it was either it was 2-2 or we were winning 2-1. Anyway, I go back to his house generally after a football match when I go up there with him, go back to his little cottage down the road. And, for my own after-match choc and biscuits, you know how it is. And we were looking forward to, a nice evening together, and then James Beattie scored 2. I think it was for Sunderland against us. Scored 2 in those last few minutes, and we went from elation to breathing easily to depression, and it was...
it didn't put you off your biscuits, did it?
No,
surely?
but it was a miserable 1 hour before I got home. Mark, thanks very much. Tim, thanks very much.